All right, today we're wrapping up my favorites updated series where I've done my top 10 series, my top 10 fantasy, and my favorite authors. And today we're going to do my top 11 novellas. It was supposed to be 10. I forgot one, and I didn't want to kick anyone off the list. These are all very much worth reading. This is like a recommendation video for novellas, especially if you're like end of the year, need to reach my reading goal, but also just if you like novellas. And I know for me, I think novellas are like not my favorite form for reading. I love long-form novels and I love short stories, but novellas are harder for me, and I think it's because they take substantially longer than a short story, but they aren't always as fulfilling as a novel. And I think that's part of it, and also the idea space of a novella. It's like, what can you satisfyingly explore without taking too long or too short a time in like 100-ish pages? I think that's really hard to do. Obviously, some authors do it really well, and I really like all of these on this list. I will say there are some like fan favorites that won't be on here, and that's because for me, I don't find them particularly satisfying. Like, I have thought about Murderbot, Psalm for the Wild built, Singing Hills. Like, I like all of those quite a bit, but they aren't in my top 10. And I think that's just because it's really hard for me to have lasting impact from a novella, like for me and my reading taste. But with that preamble out of the way, we'll start with 11. This is How You Lose the Time War. This is one of those books that I did not know anything about. In my first year on BookTube, everyone was talking about it. It was in everyone's favorites of the year. It was on so many short lists for novellas and stuff like that. And I read it, and I really liked it. It made me feel things. I like the going back and forth between like letters, the epistolary style, to just this ominous, and then someone watched the scene. So, if you haven't heard this about, we have two agents, red and blue. There is a time war. Don't worry about the time war. Do not pick this up if you care about the fact that there's a time war, or really any sci-fi factor to this. No. The sci-fi stuff, the speculative stuff, that's aesthetic. It is aesthetic. It is there. That's not why you should pick up this book. But we have these two characters who basically have this job of manipulating the time stream for their side of this war. So they're always counteracting each other, so they leave these letters for each other in very weird ways. Like once it was like in the ring of a tree. Like it's a very abstract and weird how they leave their letters. And they write to each other, and they start off bantering as just like kind of these people on opposite sides of the battle, and they fall for each other. And I found that really emotional, and I really liked the payoff of that experiment. So I think this would never have worked for me in long form. It would have taken way too much of my brain space if I had to keep juggling this abstract, dense writing style for 300 pages. But I also think getting this much space to let this relationship breathe and grow is perfect for a novella. So yeah, I really commend this work. I think about buying it often. I do. I think about rereading it and buying it often. I never quite do, because it's not quite my favorite style of writing, but I think it's very good. It's meeting its goals in terms of the project it's trying to achieve. Similarly, my next one is also one where like the thing that sticks with me are the aesthetics, the atmosphere, the writing, and that is And What Can We Offer You Tonight? This is one I read recently for my novella project this summer for the Hugos, and this is just a bunch of familiar things in an unfamiliar package. And I didn't feel at the end that I needed more, and I enjoyed my time reading it. This is also a very short novella. This is probably approaching novelette space, whatever that means. I'm still learning because of the Hugos and stuff, but this is like 77 pages. And the project's exploration of following this person, dealing with a close friend who is wrong, fighting against the system, which then could endanger their stability in the world, and how she processes that while we have this very dark, dystopian, but vibrantly colorful landscape was interesting. So I really appreciate it, and like This Is How We Lose the Time War, I think what really made it work for me was the prose style. It was very captivating, evocative, things like that. Another new release that's on this list is All the Horses of Iceland. I really liked this. This is historical fantasy, folklore-ish. Those are the buzzwords I would give you. If you really like the Bear and the Nightingale in that trilogy, you might really like this story. It takes place in a time before Iceland has their horses. This is meant to be the origin story of those horses, but it's not really about the horses. So again, expectations game, you are following a trader, and he's kind of a curmudgeon, everyone live their own life, let live, let be sort of thing. And he goes on this journey with a bunch of other traders down the Silk Road. And I think around when they're near Mongolia, he finds a trader and like mystical stuff ensues. Stuff happens, very folklory, and he gets to have some horses, and the horses come back with him to Iceland. It's about that journey. It's everything I just said. That's what this is about, and it's done in a very folklore way. I really liked getting to see this land and the religions and all the intersections that was happening in this historical time period, because it's, I want to say pretty early AD, might be even older than that, but I really liked the writing. It was very poetic. And again, a story that I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't have wanted a 300-page novel on this, but like, how long is it? I have my copy right in front of me. It's like 109 pages. So the appropriate amount of space for me to explore that thought. This next one I'll talk about is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. I've talked about this very recently on the channel, but this is great. It's a retelling of a classic, and it expands on it, and it's great. I think it took me about 2.5 hours to read, which is about how long it would take me to watch a movie. And I think that's also a thing. A novella is about the amount of time it takes me to watch a movie, and most of the time I would rather watch the movie. But in this case, I would rather read the book, because I got to be in characters' heads, and I just love the banter that T. Kingfisher brings to the page. The aesthetics were really ominous and chilling. So yeah, I just think it did Gothic novella very, very well, and it expanded on a short story and made it a novella, and made the case that this could have been a longer work. It didn't need to be a short story. There were answers to questions that were worth exploring. And yeah, I really like it, like most people who have read this work. Number 7 is going to be Driftwood by Marie Brennan. I loved this. I read this on a whim last summer. I just went to the library, I saw it on a shelf. I was reading like M.A. Carrick last year, which she's one of the names for that, and then I was also reading the Lady Trent series, and so I picked this up. Actually, I think this was before I picked up the Lady Trent series. Yes, I do believe so. And I loved it. This is the type of like dystopian, post-apocalyptic work that I really like. It's very optimistic or very cathartic. So there's Driftwood is where all the worlds go to die slowly. So when you've had your apocalypse in whatever fantasy sci-fi novel you're in, your world goes to Driftwood, and it will slowly come into the center and get eaten. And it's about how people still live. It's about how cultures still survive, and you get it through the lens of this character who everyone knows and who is immortal, never actually got eaten, and then one day he's not around anymore, and everyone's just commiserating and telling stories. And I really like that framework. Love people telling stories, and it was this optimistic view of the end of things. Like, survival and living still happens. It's, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. Even after the end, there is something to still live for. And a lot of the stories were centered around that, and yeah, I really liked it. It had cool drawings. It was a really great project, and I still always look to see if there's a copy of it anywhere for me to grab, because I do want to reread it, and I do want it. I like this cover a lot. Similarly, this next book, I'm always like, I should buy a copy. I really like the cover, and I really like the book. And novellas are just hard to rationalize, because they're basically full price, but they're very short. One day, if I have a larger library, I would like to have like a dedicated section, so maybe that's when I'll start collecting them. But this is Noor by Nnedi Okorafor. This is my favorite, which I think is a hot take, because I feel like most people don't like this book. But I love this book. I love it. It's kind of pseudo-multimedia, which I think most people don't know, because if you do just the audiobook, it's not very good at telegraphing that, but there's like podcast sections, and you also switch perspectives. And this is my favorite look into how Nnedi Okorafor looks at two characters coming together and forming a bond and, you know, coming through an ordeal together. Our main character, I forget the name that is used, but it's like an augmented individual. And she's augmented because she's disabled. So we have a disabled character who has augments to help with those disabilities. And one day, because of her augmentation, she's kind of ostracized from her community, and she's on the run because of something that happens. And we learn about this world through this different podcasts, and there's just like always this constant desert storm that we're learning about. And like, the plot of it is not what really sticks with me so much as I really enjoyed being with the two characters that come together who are both kind of ostracized from their communities, and how they maneuver that space, how they get to know each other, because one's more from a nomadic people. And I just enjoyed those quiet moments, but it was also still very fast-paced because it's a Nnedi Okorafor, and just like the ending was definitely one of those cathartic endings for me. It's one I need to reread. it's one that I really appreciated a lot of its commentary and what it was doing, and I thought it was just executed really well. Most of the time, I want more from an Eddie Okorafor work. Like 9 times out of 10, this is one where I was like, yes, this was the appropriate amount, and I really enjoyed it. The top 5 is hard. It's hard. I'm looking at my list to figure out if this is the correct order, and it's ridiculously difficult. But number 5 is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. This is a very fascinating piece of art because it's like inspired by a rap song, which is inspired by something else. Like, this piece of art has gone through many media, and this is its written form by Rivers Solomon, and I love it. I have a copy that is a very shimmery cover, and it makes me very happy. This is a story about this individual who is hypersensitive and is responsible for holding all of the memories of their people. These are, I think, let me look at my copy. They're not mermaids, but they're mermaid adjacent. Wajinru. And Yetu is the one who holds all their memories, because Wajinru are descendants of people who were thrown overboard of slave ships. And I think they're the unborn children of that, or maybe it is also the mothers. Regardless, they have a traumatic history. And so all of that trauma is held into this one individual. And every so often, she has to return these memories to everyone. And during that time period where she is no longer having this burden, she runs away from home. And she discovers someone, and she's just trying to figure out the balance between her role in her community, her responsibility, but also her responsibility to herself, not just her community. And I really enjoyed that. There's a lot to unpack there. The world building is so cool. Rivers Solomon is always like a hybrid author of like, okay, Wajinru. It's kind of fantasy, right? But like, there's a lot of sci-fi into how these creatures work with their electricity. It's more like eels. It's pretty cool. So this is a work that like definitely like sticks in my head. I mull over it. I kind of like rereading it, or like I like the idea of one day rereading it. I'm like that with a lot of novellas, but since I'm not like a novella person, it rarely happens. Like, I'm a re-consumer of media, except for novellas apparently, but it's I think a really good discussion of how do we handle our traumatic histories? What do you do as an individual in your community versus yourself? There's a lot here to unpack, and it's beautifully done. Number 4 is The Past is Red. This is similar to Driftwood, which this gives me like an optimism to the endings of things. This is one of these futures where everything's underwater, so humans live on trash piles, and we have Tetley, and Tetley is incredibly optimistic, looks at the best things of everything, even though literally every human that she knows hates her. And you learn why in the story. And the trash heap itself is just a very interesting setting to play with. It kind of felt like, even though it's like sci-fi dystopian climate fiction, it felt a little bit like, here's the witch in the tower telling her story in like a fairy tale or a folklore. I enjoyed it. Tetley has a very strong voice, a very optimistic voice, and I just loved how much she loved her home. She lives on a trash island, and she is the one character who's like, why are we striving for something that no longer exists? We have enough resources to live here, and live well. And I'm just like, you know, Tetley, I wish I was like you. So I enjoy The Past is Red a lot. I know Catherine M. Valente is an acquired taste, I think, in terms of her writing style, but it worked really well for me. It literally, I had no issues. The audiobook was not for me, but I really enjoyed reading this work. Up next, so I was trying really hard not to include novellas that are parts of series or anything like that, because those exist. Like, you'll notice there are no Stormlight novellas on here. I don't actually know if they would be here in their own right or not. I haven't even thought about them because they are so much a part of a whole. It's hard to just take them away from the work they're with. But this one I had to make an exception, and that's The Awakened Kingdom by N.K. Jemisin, because I've never felt so happy reading a novella. Like, truly, this brought me so much joy. This is the novella you read after the main trilogy for the Inheritance trilogy. And I can't really go into why we're following what we're following, but we're essentially following a new beginning for a character. We meet a new character. We have a new godling entering the world. And they're discovering the world for the first time, and it's a delight. Jemisin's voice, her ability to make unique characters that I'm instantly invested in, is on full display here. We get to see a part of the Inheritance Kingdom's land that we didn't really get to see in the main trilogy. There's a land that our main character in the first book is from, and we hear about it from a distance, but we actually get to be there with this new little godling. And I just love it. I wish I could get my hands on a physical copy of that novella. It would be in my collection so fast. They're They're way too expensive because they was kind of part of one of those either a limited printing from Subterranean Press or a limited printing of just like the hardback of these covers that I have behind me. But it's a delight. I don't know if I would love it as much if I hadn't read the trilogy, but it doesn't really, other than the trilogy happens. And so a situation occurs that allows for this godling to be formed, but we don't meet her in the main trilogy. The land, like, we're exploring, it's not a part we knew in the main trilogy. We meet some characters we knew, but it was mainly following this one individual coming to terms with her godhood and exploring the land and being curious and naive, and it was so fun. It was so fun. And Jemison, it's just Jemison. I remember it was back when I was doing weekly vlogs way back 2 years ago in the channel, and I remember I normally didn't do like quick check-ins, but like when I finished that I was like, I have to do a quick check-in, guys, because this is just so good. It was just giving me that many emotions. So yeah. The next one is the one I almost forgot, and I was like, oh my gosh, Angela, how could you? And that's The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson. This one technically, although in the Cosmere, is a standalone thought. And I don't connect it to Elantris, even though it's in the same world and has a similar magic system. This one I actually have read multiple times, and I love it every time. I've been due for a reread for a while. This is actually, I think, in my Cosmere journey, the first work that really explained investiture to me. We get more and more ideas of it as you read other parts, so everyone's getting introduced to investiture at different times. But if you read in publication order way back in the day, or even now, this was the first work that was like, oh, I'm starting to understand your essential inertia of this physics magic world. Because it's a very similar entity to inertia in our real physics talk. But not only that, just the plot was great. It's this character who is a forger, and she needs to forge a person, which is not advisable. And this person is the Emperor. And, you know, she's kind of trapped because she has to do this, or else I think they might kill her. I can't quite remember what the thing they're holding over her head. And then the process of forging. I just loved it. I've loved it every time I've read it. And, yeah, it sticks with me. And I really love the cover. And I think it's actually its 10th year anniversary right now. This number one, though, is one that I actually have read twice as well, because if I reread a novella, you know it's, especially since I've been talking, I don't read novellas very often, and that is The Life Cycle of Software Objects by Ted Chiang. This is an exhalation. There's not like a standalone bind-up of this, but it is a novella in that collection, and both times I've read this, I've read them in one sitting. This is a story about these people who make digiants, which are essentially Neopets. And so they live in this virtual online space, and people can interact with them, feed them, train them, take care of them, and they have some sentience to them. And the title, as it suggests, is the life cycle of software objects. Like, it is about what happens as software space and people's attention spans changes. What happens to these digiants that were created as we have new operating systems, as we have new networking, as it's not maybe profitable enough for certain servers to exist? What do the people who are invested in these creatures do? And I think the conversations near the end of it, especially in terms of parenting, autonomy, agency, it's all so nuanced, but also I just feel things. I just feel things when I read it. It's very well crafted. I'm engaged the entire time. So yeah, these are 11 novellas that I recommend, that I love. And feel free to recommend any to me based off these. And if you want to just leave an emoji, leave a robot or a computer because of the last story we talked about. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.